what is it about tenor drummers when they become instructors? And sometimes I think that students, when you get them, they sort of think of drumming as like a soup. It's all just this one thing. And within that, there's sound and tempo and mechanics and all of that stuff. And but it's all soup. So when you ask them to do something, they end up doing a bunch of things, right? But when you come up drumming as a tenor drummer, you are forced to, literally you're doing simultaneous responsibility all the time because you have vertical motion, you have horizontal motion. Even just that added layer forces you to separate things, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea of separating your ears from this and like understanding that if I ask you to do this, that doesn't necessarily mean you can't also do this other thing because it's just about this focus and that focus, and you can do them simultaneously.
Yeah.
And I don't know that snare drummers are necessarily forced into that, just because of the nature of the instrument.
Right. And that's definitely something that we, like when I say we, I mean like Jared and I early on tried to bring over to snare drumming was using motion to help facilitate that sound. And that's something that I think not a lot of people completely understand when we're talking about motion. We're like, oh, it's just like the movement. It's like, no, that movement is going to generate the rhythm and generate the sound quality that we want. It's like if you have this fluidity with effort, right, and it's identified of where that effort's going to be, it's not just like floppy and go. That's going to produce a sound. Analyze that. What does that sound like? Did that feel good? How did it sound? And if it's something where you're going that other direction, it's like, all right, guys, like let's just listen to these reps and let's get this sound, or someone's really harping on that and that becomes the main focus. When it's great, it's like, okay, what do we do to produce that? Because you got to reproduce it, right? And if you're just using the ears, like that's cool, but it's also, this is where the gap is too. And this is where we might diverge with philosophy. It's like you teach the book and you get it right. Sure, do the listening. Don't worry about their education in terms of how they're going to do something so that they know what they're doing for when they want to go and teach or when they want to develop their own style and approach, rather than let's educate on how they produce that sound so they can reproduce it so that they know what's going into it. So then we make a comment in terms of effort or where it's coming from, they have the proper adjustment. And so that's kind of my thought in terms of like, if we're focusing on sound, we're focusing on mechanics, like we can always bridge the gap based off of the result and based off how we want to get there if we're thinking about the sound.
And even when you're, like when you talk about considering the education that performer is receiving in that moment, if you're a staff person and the group only gets better while you're in front of them, giving them information and guiding them, versus you've given them a toolbox, you've given them references, you've given them, like you said, like a filter where you can now trust what they're going to do when they're not in front of you, right? And that they're going to keep things moving forward. I mean, that exponentially increases the amount of progress
right
you can make, because for them it can be an all the time thing that's happening in their head. It's not just during the afternoon block when you have their focus.
All right. So what we were talking about.
Hey, for everybody listening, we had to take a little breather because I had to check on some equipment. So we're jumping back in where,
That's all good.
George was talking about a topic and
Nick is about to drop a bomb. So
No.
we're just waiting.
Okay, I remember what it was. It was the phase of like, we're talking about thinking about all these things or closing that gap. And I think, something to consider, there's definitely a time and place for it. And the reason why I harp on like the mechanics of something or how and why you're doing something early on is because it is going to taper, right? You're not giving deep mechanical comments while you're in finals week.
Right.
And so, but what are you relying on? And this goes to like an athlete, who's at their top of the level, say an Olympic athlete again, when they're in that last stage, when they're in that last, I don't know, last event, whatever they're doing, they're not thinking about all those things that they thought about early training, right? A lot of thinking goes on from the mechanical standpoint, those little baby adjustments that they're trying to make, and then they're allowing it to just happen. To me, that equates to like working together, just listening to, and allowing it to be. Where sometimes people try and do that early on, but there's nothing to fall back on. And what are you actually applying? Like, yeah, you can say you had all this training before that all these guys came in from these other groups, or they came in, they're vets. It's like we need to start on the same page. We need to progress how we progress, build that training, and let them think. It's not a matter of overthinking. It's a matter of thinking about the proper things at the right time. And then letting that taper off so that they're able to just go. They're able to just drum. They're able to just listen to each other. And, you know, that's what that is. The athletes doing at the end. They're in that flow state. Like, people want to be in that drumming a little too soon, but what are they actually doing? You know, what are they thinking about? It's
funny because you like thinking about the Olympics or something like that, and when you're watching like swimming, for example, and you know one swimmer is doing multiple races and trying to win like gold in every single one of them. They have to manage the timing and what they do so like carefully, like down to the minute. And like teaching is the same way. Like, what is appropriate at a certain time? If I'm going to tell the line something, when do I need to tell them? So that they can go through the process that you're talking about, so that, you know, when it really counts, they can just let it be. Like, you know, that requires planning, you know, and I even had like, we were talking about Danny Pendergrass, which Brandon told me a funny story about Danny that I'm going to bring up to you. That when we were talking about stars, because he's going to be on staff with you guys, right? Is thinking about who's going to be on tour when, right? And what the focus and what the focus is going to be, because usually it's like who's available, right? But who do you need on tour at what time of the season based on what you're going through? And you guys are very much in tune with what's needed at every point in the season, you know. But even just thinking about that. But here's the funny story. I don't know what year this was, okay? But Danny pretending to fall down and putting a big gash in. What happened? What was the story?
This was finals week 2018. They had this big push. I don't know what they were doing. They were playing something. My back was to them, and I'm running. And I look back at like where that came from. Like, who was that? You know? And that was Danny's side. Then the rep's over. I go out standing in front of Danny. I'm like, what was that over here? And he's explaining to me how he almost fell. And he's like, yeah, I was marching on that direction change. Like, this kind of happened. And as he was trying to just show me how he almost fell, he actually fell. I was standing close enough to where his bottom rim caught my leg, and his weight just went on the drum and it fell all the way down. Pretty big gash in my leg, like from my knee to my ankle. And I just wasn't mad. I was just shocked, and I just couldn't stop laughing. I like couldn't believe what just happened.
Did you have to get stitches?
No, but I had to get a tetanus shot.
Oh man!
I just like grabbed Danny, picked him up, like walked off the field. Just couldn't. I was sitting down while like one of the health and wellness came to check it out, and I just started like laughing, and I was laughing so hard I started crying. Like, couldn't believe what just happened. So yeah, that's the story.
So let's with the time we have left, because I want to talk about stars.
Yeah, I was going to get to that right now myself.
And here's the thing I know, Nick, is that you've spent a lot of time as a tech, right? And you know, you've been given a lot of trust and in terms of like how you do things, and you're brought in for a purpose and all of that stuff. But there's also a lot of like other things being dictated, right? And I imagine you've learned a lot from that, you know, like if it were up to me, like where, you know, with stars, right? This sort of new chapter. Are you in more of a position to sort of define like, all right, here's what we're going to do, you know, and or is it more of just fulfilling sort of what's some, because we had Greg on, you know, and we're excited about what is to come, you know, with that group. What's going to be different for you, and what's it going to be, at least as far as like how's it all coming together, you know, and what you guys are planning?
Yeah, well, I'm still primarily at Blue Devils.
Yeah.
Still doing a little chunk there. The Blue Stars thing kind of came about in terms of my involvement from Tony.
Right.
He's writing the book. He got Greg in there, got Jesus to do some stuff. Easy.
And for those who don't know, he's talking Tony Nunez.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the names I'm mentioning are all people who are at Arcadia.
Mm-hmm.
Arcadia High School, yes.
Yeah. And so he brought on Jesus, Easy, and myself, more so as consultants. So I'm not going to be doing like a lot of tour per se, but just going in and helping out kind of where needed. And I'm excited for it because I've never done a role like this.
Yeah, that's a different role.
Yeah.
So how is that? Where's the opportunity in that? Like, what are you going to get to do?
Yeah, I'm excited because the stuff I like to talk about is, you know, based off of observing a group and seeing where people are at, and then just giving them insight into how it can be a little bit better. And that goes from like a micro level from somebody's hands to like how they're operating in a rehearsal. And so that's what I'm most excited about. And it's really cool that, you know, Danny and Sean are the snare guys there, along with Cam. So it's going to be cool to see what those guys do and kind of help out wherever I can. And I think and I mentioned those two specifically because, you know, I taught them at Blue Devils and they know my language, so I think they can help with translating certain things. And
I know you talked about teaching with Danny, and so, but have you been in that situation with Sean? Like, do you know? Like, it's funny because last year in Dayton we rolled up on Monarch, and he was helping out at Monarch last year, and I literally in front of everybody I was like, Sean, what kind of instructor are you? Like, what does this guy say? You know, because I had him at Dark Sky.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah, George put him on the spot. Yeah.
You know, and but it's just, I mean, to me it's a treat to be like, okay, former students.
Yeah.
What's gonna come out of your mouth? Like, how are you gonna handle this? How are you gonna make it your own?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's exciting. And that's what's cool about seeing people like Danny and Brandon, you know, Brandon at Blue Devils, is just seeing how they evolve, you know, and not micromanaging how they do things, but, you know, giving them feedback and helping guide them if it's necessary. And so I think that's what's cool too about, you know, kind of off topic, but not really, like at Blue Devils, you know, young guys get brought in, and some people be like, well, they haven't taught anywhere. It was like, no, but they know the organization, and from experience, like just that alone can help set the tone of how you want to do things. Because people can easily go in there and try and change everything and do things different because that's how they did it at, you know, X place. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's cool seeing them kind of grow into their own and see how they like to teach, you know, and stuff that we've talked about, but they like to, you know, deliver it differently. So it's cool.
Do you feel like, or do you recognize you doing for them the same way Jared and Jeremy did for you?
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to think that way, you know, and again, it's through conversation. It's not in front of the group like, hey, dude, do this.
Mm-hmm. Like, oh, no, don't listen. Like, what did you just say?
Yeah, no, it's just talking about stuff and sharing ideas and learning from each other. So,
okay,
that's cool. What advice can you give to the young performer that dreams about being an RCC or Blue Devils or Blue Stars? What would you tell them to work on or to be aware of?
Yeah, that's a good one. You know, one of my lesson students asked me this recently, and I couldn't help but be like, man, you're like a product of this generation where you just overloaded with this Instagram page and that YouTube page or channel telling you, do it this way. This is how you do it. Like learn this rudiment. And so, my advice is you've already drummed, I'm assuming you've already drummed a bunch of things. Tease out those skill sets. And my advice is find 3 to 5 things that affect most things that you play, and it's not rudiments. Rudiments are built of skill sets, right? So I would always say, like, when I watch someone play eights and then like bucks or some twitch, it's like I can easily see how their double beat's going to be, how their rolls are going to be, how they're going to shift into quick upstrokes and quick downstrokes, or softer downstrokes. Like you could just see based off of their intensity of their mechanics and their control over everything of how it's going to apply to other things. And I don't think students see that. I think they practice like the what? Like, oh, I learned this lick. Oh, I learned this exercise. It's like, if I could just learn all the exercises and all the rudiments, like, great. Like, learn those things. Nothing's wrong with that. But at least know what those are built of. Like, if you learn all those rudiments, there's just a few skill sets that cover every rudiment. Yeah. It's like, do you know what those are? And do you know where your deficiencies lie when you change the height, when you change the tempo, and when you change the duration? Because those are the factors that influence your effort. And so if they could figure out what those things are, one, it starts with your awareness, and are you aware when you're drumming? And that's the bigger thing. Are you practicing? Sometimes my advice is like, just drum more.
Are they like, dude, but I got the leg pump thing going,
Oh man, don't even me start on some stuff. I mean, well, how much we do that?
How much do you have the misconceptions, right? Like this is what I think I have to do, right? Are there common ones where you're always saying, let go of that?
Yeah,
Instead,
I think the playing faster thing kind of comes up, because a question I like to ask is like, all right, if you're chopping out, what do you chop out on? How do you chop out? Like, faster, play fast rolls. It's like, you don't have to play fast to chop out. It's like, you don't see people who are working out to build muscle just like moving quickly. Moving slowly does something different. A pause does something different. Quick explosiveness, but not with a lot of weight, does something different. Intensity levels that vary give you different results. And so it's the same thing with drumming, right? Like twitch, like a quick low tap that's efficient, right? And that's another word. Like, what does that mean? Well, we don't have to get too deep into that, but it's like you don't have to play that thing, right, fast. You can play it slower, but the same mechanics, just faster or higher, and chop out on the height, which will help build that muscle. So then you back off of it a little bit when you go faster and allow the rebound to work for you. And that's given it, if you've actually figured out the mechanics behind it of how it feels, so you can reproduce that.
Yeah. Have you ever had to cut anybody over attitude, having a bad attitude?
Good question.
Or do you use it if their hands are good? Is it something you just live with? That they're gonna just have a bad attitude.
But it's important, right?
It is important.
These are.
I know what you're getting at.
I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just say, when at an audition, when it comes down to cutting people, it's not just me making that decision. It's all of us. It's the whole staff, talking about everybody, and that is definitely a big part of it. And yes, there have been people who have had great hands who've been let go simply because of their attitude. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard thing, right? That's something too, on the flip side is sometimes they have an attitude and they cover it up well, and they make that group and then make life difficult for others around them.
100%, yeah.
And it's hard to manage that kind of thing, but that's just the reality of it.
Have you had to cut them after the fact? Like they're there and it's like,
or
it's just not really working out.
It's kind of hard to do, but
or when, because there's a lot of stuff you're really good at when it comes to the, all the things that we've touched on. How are you with, let's say you have somebody in the line, and or even just that there's a dynamic mm-hmm. that is bubbling, brewing, mm-hmm. that is going to be a negative as far as like holding you guys back from where you want to get to. How do you
make that confrontation?
How do you handle that?
No, that's real. That's definitely something we talk about early season, and I will give credit to like Sean Clark. He's really good at establishing how we want to operate when that arises, and so he's good at like getting them to be friends. I mean, I think nowadays it's so much easier for them to just get along, but those things do happen, and sometimes it all depends on who that person is and who they're affecting, because their response, it's like cutting someone. Like, depending on how they respond and how they're reacting, it's easier to give them the info, or it's more difficult to give them that news. And so it's the same thing with conflict that's inevitable. If it's somebody who's just being that guy, but they're aware and they know that you can be more direct, and more often than not, that shuts it down and they're fine. And then we can move on. Sometimes that person's not as aware and they don't know that they're causing these waves and kind of doubling down, and that makes it a lot more difficult, especially if the people who they're affecting are a little bit softer in personality. So yeah, it's definitely a delicate touch when it comes to that kind of thing, and we just chat with them, and at different levels of who's going to be that person to talk to them, because also depending on the relationship between those people, those members and staff, the effect is different. And again, that's just the reality of it. Like, sometimes you have a student that responds different to your caption head, or responds different to the quad tech, or responds different to the other snare tech, or the director. Like, it's all kind of case by case.
Before we wrap it up, because we talked about it offline, I did want you to, if you can, provide any insight or anything you can offer up with regards to, you've been aged out now for 10 years, and you've managed to still move your life forward and stay involved in the activity. If you can offer any advice to people in that same situation, what I know and what we all know is that this activity has a really strong gravity to it, right? It's very seductive. You can get a feeling of belonging and a sense of importance, if you want to call it that, or achievement, that it's hard to get other places sometimes, like in your real life. So a lot of people stick around, and sometimes at the cost of the rest of their life moving forward, and laying a foundation for late adulthood, right? How do you feel like you've managed that these last 10 years? And do you have any advice for anybody that's in this situation where it's like, I could teach, but I also have other things I want to do?
I think starting at the individual who's in it right now and who's choosing to maybe quit, or not do their age out so they can go to school or get that job, my advice would be, drum corps is not around forever. You can't do this thing. If you're actually passionate about it and you want to stay involved in some way, finish it out. Like, you can take a quarter off, or you can get that internship next semester, whatever it is. I would say, like, this thing that is so special and rare comes and goes, and so the job will be there, the enrollment in school can be there, and on the other side of it is, if you can, is get school going, get your work going, or whatever it is that you want to do, not as a plan B, but in tandem with teaching as early as you can. I definitely just taught for a long time, and school was like very distant second of my priority. And so, going back to school and making that happen was a challenge, but it was definitely worth it. And it shifted, or it kind of allowed me to stay as a tech, which I love. Like, the education of it is what pulls me and brings me back each year. Like, that's the fun part to me. Maybe not so much like the logistics and other things you'd have to worry about if you were caption head or director. Yeah. And so the tech thing has been fun because that's what I enjoy. And so it also depends on what your goal is. If you want to be a tech, if you want to like run programs, find some balance. And the only way to experiment with that is if you're trying to do that other thing alongside with teaching, to make sure that you're setting up your future for, if this thing doesn't work out, are you going to be able to do that other thing? Or if you're only teaching one school, no lessons, no this or that, how are you going to make money? Right. So my advice would be to try and do those things earlier on to see what you can manage, to learn time management skills, and learn what you want to prioritize earlier on, so that you're able to set it up more efficiently kind of as you go, rather than starting later and then dipping out on teaching and then kind of having nothing. So
Trying to re-engage later, yeah.
mm-hmm.
Even though that can happen.
It can happen.
Yeah.
Did you have anything else, Rob?
I'm good, you know.
Nick, is there anything you wanted to talk about before we wrap this up? Have we hit everything?
I don't know. I think we hit quite a bit.
Your fear of bass drummers, you know, that's just...
Talk about some mechanics.
Let's go. Let's
Dude,
go.
I don't think, you know...
I'm just kidding.
You're like,
I know daylight savings time just started.
You
but
do the reaction videos with Rennick. We need to have let's just talk about Twitch.
You know what we need to do is we need to get some old school videos and have him react to like
the
techniques
hands
from back in the 1900s when
the 1900s.
Yeah.
Nick, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Like I mentioned in the beginning, it's always a thrill for me when a student of mine gets to learn from you. And I think this conversation gives some insight into why that is, you know? So we really appreciate you coming and you know, giving us a glimpse, you know, into who you are as a human being and all of that stuff. And thank you for everything that you've done, you know, as far as like all the education and just even just your approach to it, you know, how mindful you've been about how you want to go about it has been really awesome, you know, and we're excited to see, you know, what comes from, you know, I'm excited to see RCC's full show. I'm excited to see how Arcadia finishes out the year, and what Blue Devils is going to be like this year and what Blue Stars is going to be like this year.
Dude, Scholastic World this year is like crazy. Yeah. There's a lot of great groups.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having this conversation with us.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, man. Fun. Thanks for being here for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if if there's ever anything, if you ever want to come back and chit chat and break down some mechanic stuff, we're here for it. You know.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, everybody. Well, that's it, and let's see how the rest of the season plays out, and I'm sure our next episode will be chatting more about this WGI season, this winter season, SEPA, and everything. You know. Yeah,
and look for us in the lot.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Please come and say hi. And
say hi to the George Collins.
Oh my goodness. And
that's how everybody always calls him, the George Collins.
Everybody's like, that's Rob Bass.
No, nobody.
Drum Corps Coffee Shop.
Nobody says it. They said the coffee shop. Yeah.
And please tell us where to go eat, because we need good food recommendations.
Yes, especially when we're out of town.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take care.